Yes, yes. Welcome to the ancient world of tabletop games. I am Agamemnon from the historical documentary Time Bandits. This is a report from a fugitive. This masked and goggled skull hovered to one side on the table for a video I planned weeks ago. The last video I put out was on the topic of sprues, and I recommended goggles and masks for protection against flying bits of plastic and particles of resin in the air from cutting, scraping, and filing sessions. In this video, the image takes on a whole new meaning, one of social isolation. How do you play board games when you can't reach your players? Luckily, I set the whole channel up to eventually play board games online. History is full of events, dear boy, events. In the board game community, everyone has a coronavirus video. This is mine. How do you play games online? Electronically, using applications, if that's your thing. My studio table is set up to give collaborators on other continents a view of the game board, and my choice of board game is based around various factors that make online play easier. As the board game doctor, I'd make house calls to test transportation of games, the usefulness of third-party accessories, and my ability to set up, explain, and play a game to its conclusion in one easy session. But the board game doctor isn't making house calls now. I shut that routine down 2 weeks before everything else closed, and I switched to online play. This wasn't recorded. The record of those games lies in the memory of the humour felt in humourless times. What did I try first? Pandemic. Partly this was in response to the disease around us. Pandemic is a cooperative venture. We are all in this together in our war against the game. And, isolated, socially, physically distant, we could still play a session and stay socially, mentally connected, functioning. And we would win the real-life war against the disease by staying home as we played out make-believe disease revenge fantasies across a televised game board. Yes, fighting disease in a board game was our fuck you to the coronavirus. We lost the make-believe game by one card, right at the end, but in staying home we believe we won the real thing, and playing that long game is far more important. We can afford to lose a fight against a board game we play at a distance. It's the distancing that lets us win a measure of safety in keeping the hospitals from collapsing. Since writing the first few paragraphs of this video script, I've been made aware of Pandemic's designer, Matt Leacock, making his own "we are all in this together" statement. Sales of Pandemic increased during the pandemic. People want to give 2 fingers to the coronavirus by board gaming. 2 washed fingers in gloves at a distance, naturally. What sort of game can you play online? Pandemic is a fantastic example. The game is cooperative. Every player has a clearly defined turn based on having a few actions. Player takes a turn. The game takes a turn. Next player reacts to the latest outbreaks of disease on the world map, flying a specialist in to fight biological fires, and so on. All information in the game is public. There are no hidden hands of cards. It is very easy to play out public game information on a Skype call. The board is here on this table. Players all have roll cards, and you cluster the player's hand with each roll card. One camera handles all of the action. The game is about making plans. Everyone is free to chip in with their views and team up to use special abilities in combination to battle a disease that's frothing away. Even on a distant Skype call, that's very social. But it is up to the current player to enact plans on his or her turn. As the central controller of table management, I let you tell me where you want your playing piece to go. If other players don't like that, you get to tell them where to go. There are no dice. This may or may not be a problem for you. If regular dice feature in a board game, anyone can use those regular dice at home. Difficulties arise with dedicated dice. There are ways around that issue. Hell, there are ways around dealing with hidden information in games. But I'm sticking to the basics of using Skype to show a one-camera view of a board. Pandemic serves as a great example of a game suited to online play. It's not a dexterity game, isn't based on a sand timer, and focuses heavily on public information with clearly regulated turns. Used up your 4 actions? Let's see what the disease does in its turn. Next player, and so on. My overhead camera slider has a good command of the board, though I get in the way of the rail quite a lot as we shift position over different sections of play. The board has to sit near the back of the table to allow wiggle room for the cross-sliding action, and that means leaning further over the table for me, unavoidably bumping the camera tripods. There's space, but not much. At any time, a player can request a view of the top left, lower left, or central sections of the board, and let's throw in the bird's eye view of the game board, as well as scenes to the side of the board, with vital information there on player displays or in hands of cards. It's all up for grabs. Here's a dice tower. What about dice? There's a dice game version of Pandemic, but I don't own it, waiting for it to go back into reasonable circulation to lower those inflated prices on the 3 copies out there in the wilderness. The Pandemic game with a sand timer is of no use to me for online play. Even having everyone use timing apps online, lag is always going to be an issue for intercontinental player fairness. On another online game session, we switched to Horrified, a cooperative game with distinct turns, player actions, public information, and a strong sense that we are all in this together. Angela Lansbury teamed up with Andy Warhol to defeat Count Dracula and the creature from the Black Lagoon, before the shock revelation that Andy Warhol had been a vampire all along, with similar suspicions about Angela Lansbury. Murder she did, and that is a Cabot Cove murder rate fact. We won that cooperative game by 3 cards. Card decks often act as game-ending timers in co-op play. Ah yes, the dice. In this game, the monsters roll dedicated dice to determine combat effects and special monstrous abilities. As the monsters roll these dice, it doesn't really matter who physically rolls for the fights. I made a thing out of it by scrolling the camera to the side for a live-action visit to the dice tower, and then scrolling back to kill off another hapless villager. Pandemic and Horrified worked very easily across the internet. Some people feel the need to roll those bones. If you team up with players across the globe and they all have a copy of the game, then they all have access to the dice. But you don't really need to roll those dice. I know, this is gaming heresy, but it cuts across all the psychobabble and bizarre near-occult rituals connected to the tumbling pieces of plastic. As long as someone rolls the dice for a result, the game is in play over the interwebs, and that's the point of interactive social isolation. You get to play the game no matter what. Horrified calls for random distribution of handy items across the map. Yes, I drew the items of equipment from the bag, but for convenience you'd most likely have one player handle that bag task around a crowded table anyway. So it isn't a great loss if one person rolls the dice, draws items from a bag, and moves every single playing piece around on behalf of those who can't reach to that side of the table. In another house, most possibly on another continent. Sacrifices are made. I'm talking about the hapless villagers. The physical limitations of gameplay didn't alter the gameplay in the games I've mentioned. If players all want to roll the dice themselves and can't, it's a change to gameplay that for me doesn't really mean anything. We are quarantined, yet we still get to play the game. That's a win all by itself. Sticking with cooperative games and going back to Pandemic designer Matt Leacock, I set Forbidden Desert down on the table. Public information, no dice. All in it together. Admittedly, it's taken a real-life Pandemic to play this game in quarantine. The game breaks a major design rule. Thou shalt not put your fucking board game in a shortbread tin. And that really is a board gaming fact. I was reluctant to transport the tin, knowing it would be crushed flat by the time I crossed town as I made my board game Doctor House calls. So I took the tin off a shelf, set the game up, and played it. Back to the shelf in one unbattered box, or tin. It's a winner. What are the advantages of online tabletop play? I set up Pandemic and Forbidden Desert in advance. Update Skype. Check all the camera and microphone connections. Slap the headphones on and you're ready to go. No faffing about with players who fall asleep during game setup. If that's how you want things to go. Horrified ran a little differently. It's okay to set the game up in advance if everyone knows how to play, but setting a game up in front of the crowd gives novice players a clear way into how the game works. Here's the map. There's your character display. This is the monster card with its mini-game that shows how to defeat the menace. We'll be drawing this equipment from that bag and gathering gear to help in the coming fight. Yes, that added to the duration of the Skype call. Looking at the Skype records, Pandemic lasted 4 hours. There was a lot of banter in there, and I took the time to have short breaks to arrange a meal and deal with life in general. This table sits at the end of the room in its own mini film studio. The point being that I can set up an elaborate video or a complex game and mark an end section midway through. Life interrupts. You need to sleep. but the game will be waiting on the table for a resumption of festivities. I recommend a current player marker to note whose turn it is if the game breaks up for any length, and a small supply of tokens that are removed as players use up their actions. Simple things like that will keep you straight if you stray heavily into banter. Forbidden Desert ran about 2 hours. I threw a quick dice game in there as well. Horrified lasted 3 hours, including game setup and rules explanation and packing the game away. What are the running times of these games? Pandemic Iberia runs around 45 minutes once you know what you're doing. The joke about this version was that it came along as a limited edition, freely available everywhere for eternity. It finally looks as though stocks ran out, as it's scarce and growing in price. Okay, 4 hours to play a 45-minute game. Forbidden Desert is also a 45-minute game that took 2 hours. Both games were set up on the table in advance. Horrified has a running time of 1 hour, yet we tripled that to a shade over 3 hours. Why? Various factors. First, a sense of occasion. You can't meet in person, so you socialise over a Skype board game session instead, and you catch up on the banter of what everyone hasn't been doing lately, going outside, for example. In short, this was new. The first session had teething trouble, and the second session came packed with remedies for making mistakes in the first session. In one case, I made a thing of game setup, added to the experience and the running time. Why? Just to show off this. On the back of the game board. It's a nice little reference to Universal monster movies of the dim and distant past. Banter takes up time. Quite right, too. Meal breaks and toilet breaks add to that. Even the dreaded phone call interruption, which should not be a thing, was a thing. Game setup and game explanation. Choosing which characters to play rather than taking random selections. Naming the characters and acting out their roles. Yes, I was Antonio Banderas in a game of Pandemic. He regularly donated suitcases full of his shirts to make bandages, leaving him temporarily shirtless, bringing on feverish effects in the target audience of the movie. This was our gloved middle finger to the real-life disease raging across the world, creating a torrid romance against the backdrop of a natural disaster, starring Senor Banderas, not coming to a cinema near you. Without humour, no matter how seemingly inappropriate, well, without humour we aren't human at all. Table management also added to the running time. I was the blue-arsed fly, working the camera, drawing the cards, reading the effects, moving the playing pieces, rolling the dice, and knocking dead peasants over once Dracula had his way with them. Camera management added to the duration. The player wants to see this part of the map. How does that alter play options in the other part of the map? Wait, go to the centre and give me a bird's eye view. Enhance 34 to 46. Pull back. Wait a minute. Go right. Stop. Enhance 57-19. Track 45 left. Stop. Enhance 15 to 23. Give me full screen right there. For a video, I'd edit out a load of stuff. Fluff. Condense the game setup to the essentials, possibly at higher speed. Wrestle the running time back down nearer the listing on the box. Is there a major consideration I've left out? Geographical locations. Around the table, from one semi-random starting player, there's an order of play. It's usually clockwise. Occasionally, play order runs in the other direction. How do you handle that online? Open with a starting player and then move across a map of the world in a clockwise direction to seat your assembled team, or make your own arrangements, but be consistent. And be patient with the blue-arsed fly buzzing around the game board on your behalf. If the whole operation has even a hint of being swan-like, it's thanks to a load of frantic paddling beneath the surface.